Okay, so Logan, I think we can start. My name is Antônio Márcio. In the name of Colégio 19 de Março, it's a great pleasure to have you here right from NASA to talk to our students about going to the moon in 2024 in an Artemis mission. The class is yours. Thank you.
All right. So yeah, we'll have a few charts here that we can talk about. I think it starts with a video that we can watch for a minute, and then I'll step through some more charts and explain the Artemis program. And you can ask questions at the end. If you have something that's really urgent, go ahead and ask. I believe we have a whole hour, so I would rather answer it at the time than have you forget it. So let's go ahead and go to the video.
50 years ago, we went to the moon. We called it Apollo.
What many people don't know is that Apollo had a twin.
She was a woman named Artemis,
goddess of the moon.
We are returning to the moon
as a new generation of explorers.
This time to stay.
And to prepare to achieve humanity's next giant leap of sending the first human missions to Mars.
We believe our course will redefine what is possible.
That we would discover life-saving,
earth-changing science.
And that the challenges ahead will inspire generations.
This is our manifest.
For all who wondered if we could return.
For all who dreamed of pressing beyond.
This is your calling.
We go for all of America.
We go. We go as the Artemis generation.
We go.
They make really good videos, so I hope that was inspiring. I think I can just be done there. So yeah, like they said in the video, Artemis is the twin sister of Apollo. Apollo was when we went to the moon back in the 60s and 70s, and we're going again. It is the twin sister, and the Greek mythology part is really interesting to me. I love the Apollo missions. I know a lot about them. I've been interested in them for years, and so when they named it Artemis, it was really special to me. So I'm glad to be working there. Next slide. So there's a lot of reasons why we're going back to the moon, but one of the biggest ones is the science. I'm not a scientist myself, but I work with a lot of scientists, a lot of lunar scientists. And you can see here, there's 6 big areas that we're trying to do the science of when we're on the moon and on the way to the moon. But we're really just trying to learn more about it and trying to eventually build a moon base where we live there for long periods of time and see what we have on the moon that can sustain humans for long periods of time. We know the Earth can sustain us really well. But the moon is a little bit more tricky to live there. And so the more that we learn about the moon, and the biggest one that you hear about is if there's water ice, you can see the blue there. We're pretty sure, well, we know there is ice there, but we don't know exactly how deep it is or how much there is. And water is, of course, critical to life. You can drink it, but you can also make rocket fuel out of it. You can use it for radiation protection. So water is really, really helpful. And one of the biggest things we're going to be doing is looking for the water and learning about that. But we're also just learning more about our solar system and the moon in general. Next slide. This is a cool video that shows you what the south pole of the moon looks like. And let's play it a few times while I talk about it. When we went in Apollo, we went to the equator. So, if this is the moon, we went in the front where we all can see. And that's the sun was right above them all day, and it was pretty simple. But on the equator, you have 2 weeks of daylight and then 2 weeks of darkness. And the daylight is great, but surviving 2 weeks of darkness on the moon is really challenging. It gets very cold, and you probably can't go outside for 2 weeks. And so they were great for those missions that didn't last very long. But if we're going to go to stay there for long periods of time and have habitats and rovers, we want to go somewhere that's a little bit easier to stay. And the South Pole is that place. And you can see on the video here, it's just the way that the sun and the moon work. The south part of the moon generally gets a lot of sunlight. There's a couple places that stick up a little bit higher, you know, mountain peaks and things. And if you can land right on the top of that peak, you'll have sunlight for most of the year, and that makes everything easier. And then the other cool part about it is you can see in this video that there are parts that are valleys. And if you're in a valley, it gets no sunlight at all throughout the year. We call those permanently shadowed regions. And we know that there's some really interesting science down inside there. And we think that's where the water is and some other really cool stuff down in those regions. So the South Pole was great because you have those spots of sunlight and you have the spots of darkness, and both are really critical to our sustained presence on the moon. Next slide. So there's a lot of pieces of the Artemis program. This right here is the Orion crew capsule. So this is the vehicle that the crew are going to ride on their way out to the moon. You could think of it like Apollo. The Apollo had the command and service module, and they had 3 crew in there. The Orion vehicle can do 4 crew, and it has these big solar panels on it, and it can sustain crew for a long period of time. It's the only capsule like that in the world that is meant to go away from Earth for long periods of time into deep space and keep the crew alive. It has an exercise machine on it. It has a way to, you know, recycle your water and recycle your air. So it's a great capsule, and that's what the crew used to get to the moon. Let's go to the next slide. And one of the coolest things about working at Artemis is that I've been working at NASA for about 15 years now, and you hear a lot about plans to go places and what it may look like, but this is an actual picture of that Orion crew capsule that we just saw, which was just an animation or a picture, which is what we saw for so many years. But this is the real picture. This is the real deal. This is the Orion crew capsule that's supposed to launch this year or next year and have the crew. This one isn't going to have crew in it. The first mission doesn't have crew, and it'll be just robotic. But it's so amazing to see the actual pictures and the people standing around it. You can see how big it is compared to how big the people are. So these slides have a few pictures of the actual real hardware, which is just so exciting. Next slide. So how the Orion capsule gets to the moon, it starts with this big rocket we call the SLS, or the Space Launch System. And so that gets us off the planet and up into space. And then the capsule, which is just the very top part of that, is where the crew are. And then they'll ride that capsule over to the moon. And the next slide shows, like I was saying, there's a real piece of hardware right there. So what we just saw was a picture, which was, you know, a while ago when what we thought it would look like. And there is the actual hardware. And this has already been fired. They took those engines and they fired them in a big test stand. And then they shipped it down here. This is at the Kennedy Space Center where we launched the rockets. And that's the big vehicle assembly building, which is just this enormous building. You can see how small the people are. The actual hardware is arriving down at the Cape right now, getting ready to launch and be assembled. So it's just so interesting to see this all come together after a couple of years of talking about it. Next slide. So the first mission is Artemis 1, and that's what the hardware, the real hardware you're seeing, is for that mission. And that is the first time the SLS rocket is going to be launched, and the first time the Orion capsule is going to be launched. And so we're not putting people in it. We like to do things pretty safely here at NASA. And so that mission is going to have those two pieces together and test them out. So the next slide.
3.
It's a cool video.
1, 0. Ignition. Liftoff.
Artemis 1 will lift off from Launch Pad 39B at NASA's Kennedy Space Center in Florida with 8.8 million pounds of thrust, provided by the most powerful rocket in the world, our Space Launch System rocket, or SLS. The uncrewed flight will be the first integrated test of SLS, our new Orion spacecraft, and exploration ground systems at Kennedy. Artemis 1 will send Orion beyond the moon, 280,000 miles from Earth, farther than any human spacecraft has ever flown.
this is not NASA doing this. This is the United States of America doing this program, the Artemis program, and there are companies all across our country that have a part in it. So there is kind of this wave of excitement being generated just by saying, we're going back to the moon.
After the upper stage of the rocket separates from Orion, the upper stage will deploy small satellites over several days to perform science experiments and technology demonstrations. Orion will make its multi-day outbound trip to the moon, propelled by a service module provided by the European Space Agency. Engineers will test Orion's systems on the way to the moon. Then, Orion will fly about 60 miles above the lunar surface, using the moon's gravity and engines on the service module to enter a lunar orbit. After about a month and a total distance of over 1 million miles, Orion will return home, faster and hotter than any spacecraft has before. A primary goal of Artemis 1, ensure Orion safely returns to Earth before we fly with humans. When we do, we'll build our capability for sustainable lunar exploration, preparing us for missions farther into the solar system.
Initially, what we'd like to do is start establishing a presence on the moon. So we're going to establish going back there on a regular basis, and then we'll end up setting up Gateway, and we would launch to the Gateway, and from Gateway, land on the surface of the moon.
We are there for, weeks, months on end. And there, we're going to be able to test out all the hardware and the habitats and the hatches and the suits and the rovers that'll allow us to prove out those technologies. The moon will lead the way to Mars, and we should be there within the next couple of decades.
All right, so like I said, that's the Artemis 1 mission, and it also gave you a bit of a teaser about the next few things I'm going to talk about. I don't actually work on Orion or SLS. I work on the landing system. We call it HLS, Human Landing System, which will be in a few slides here. So we'll get to that shortly, but it's exciting that that mission is going to go very soon. So Artemis 2, it will be the first crewed mission of the Orion spacecraft. And so you can see what the inside of it looks like. This is a ground vehicle that we're testing and training astronauts here on Earth. You can see the crew in their awesome spacesuits and what the control panel looks like in front of them. This spacecraft, you can see all 4 crew. You can see the 2 people's kind of small underneath the 2 in the front here. 4 crew mission, like I said before. So Artemis 2 will bring crew out to the moon. Like it said, it's farther than any human has gone before. And that'll be the one right after Artemis 1. So let's do next slide. This is really exciting. So you saw some of these faces in these videos. These are the astronauts that were kind of initially picked to be some of the crew that would go on these missions. And what's interesting to me about it is that while they do look like really cool astronauts, of course, they always look great. I work closely with some of these crew. And I've been to tests with them or been in meetings with them where they're offering their opinion about, okay, if we make the bathroom look like this, what do you think about it? Well, how does that compare to the bathroom on the space station? And so it's just so interesting for me I'm a huge space nut, working with people that have been up in space and can bring that experience, because I don't know what it's like to go to the bathroom in space. And so if they have an opinion and experience, it's always really helpful. So it's great working with them, and they're all really sharp. All right, so Artemis 3, here's where I get involved. This is where we will land. We'll land on the moon. There's a few different pieces here. So on the right here, that's the human landing system, or a mock-up of it, a render of it, what it could look like. And then the spacesuit there in the middle is also a piece that I work with pretty closely. So my job title is I'm the HLS surface lead. So we have broken the mission up into the different phases. And so when we're on the surface, that's me. That's my bucket. That's where I live. And so I'm talking with the spacesuit people and rovers and the scientists and the tools people, and trying to make sure that we can bring all what we need to bring and what we do on the surface and what the crew is doing, and making sure we can get in and out of the spacesuit and make sure the spacesuit can do what we want it to do. So that's where I live, and Artemis 3 will be the first time we get to utilize all that on the moon's surface. Next slide. All right, there we go. So for the past year or so, we had this really interesting competition where we had 3 companies that were all working. They got money from NASA to develop concepts to land on the moon. And they all had very different concepts. And they all had different ideas about how to get the crew to the moon, how to get the crew in and out of the vehicle, and everything. And they worked for a while. We tentatively selected SpaceX to be that first landing. This is their vehicle here. You can see, if you've been following SpaceX, you can know how big their vehicles are. They're very big. The crew way down there at the bottom, you can see them in a rover. There's actually an elevator they have to climb to get up and in the vehicle, which you can see on the surface there. So they ride an elevator down to the surface and ride it back up to get back in. And yeah, it's just, there's lots of awesome stuff that they can bring, and we will be landing there. 2024 is the idea. And so I'm working with SpaceX, worked with them over the past year for testing things like that elevator and making sure that the spacesuits that NASA provides works with their vehicle. Next slide. Right, so this is another, you saw in the video, this is called Gateway. And you can see in the bottom right, the gold, that's another image of what the landing system could look like. We don't want to tell them what it should look like. We want to tell them, hey, get the crew to the surface, and whatever you need to do that, you do it. We're not going to dictate. We're not going to force you to do any certain things. And so this was another concept that's been interesting, looking at all the different concepts of what the vehicle could look like. But the Gateway is a small space station that's around the moon. You can see Orion is in that top right corner, or maybe this way, one of these. The HLS, the lander, is the gold, and then the rest of it is where the crew can live and work and prepare to go down to the moon. And the Gateway is starting off kind of small, just like the space station did around the Earth, and it'll just slowly get bigger over time and be more capable, and you can stay there for longer and do more science and more testing out of it. And so that's a big part of the Artemis mission. We have a lot of international partners with this vehicle. You can see another concept of what the HLS looks like there on the bottom. It's interesting to see it again. So we're working with international partners on the larger Gateway. We have things like airlocks and a habitat for the crew. The initial habitat is kind of small because it's the first one. We're only doing a few crew there for a while, but the habitats will get bigger and more capable. And you even start talking about refueling vehicles out there. So bringing your rocket fuel with you is not easy. And so if you have a way to refuel things out there, Gateway is going to bring that capability as well. So another great picture here. So this is a HLS there on the moon. As I was saying before, the sun being at that really low angle, the sun isn't overhead. It's going to be like in the morning here on Earth when the sun is really low on the horizon. That's what it looks like here. And so that's why we have the big solar panels that are pointed towards the sun. And if you go behind a hill, you may go into darkness pretty quickly. And so it's really interesting planning that mission when we know that the crew, we want them to get out and do really good science, but we have to be careful about where we land to make sure that the crew, don't get lost or don't go somewhere that's too cold. The spacesuit, the space is very cold, and we're used to working in space around the space station. But going into those shadowed regions, those valleys that I talked about before, that's even colder. You're talking about 30 degrees Kelvin. So it's very, very, very close to the coldest you can possibly be. And we know the crew can go in there for short periods of time, and we're designing all the hardware, the suits and everything to go in there for short periods of time because we think that's where some really interesting science is. But we don't want them to go in there for too long because you're at 30 Kelvin for too long and you start getting pretty cold. So it's been really fun planning those missions. On the right here, you can see a concept for the rover that we might have. This is an unpressurized rover. So there's two kinds of rovers. One is like this, where you're wearing a spacesuit and you drive around just like Apollo. And then there's another concept for a pressurized rover that's a habitat on wheels. So you go into it with a suit, but then the inside of it is pressurized just like a lander or the space station. And you can get out of your suit and drive it around. And then if you need to go out again to do an EVA, an extra vehicular activity with a suit, then you can get back in your suit in your rover and go do more EVAs. So there's several different concepts of how we're going to live and work on the South Pole down there. So of course, when you're working at NASA, you always have Mars in your mind, or at least I do. It came up in a couple of these videos that our end goal is we want to send people to Mars. Now, it's much harder to send people to Mars than it is to the moon. You probably knew that. To get to the moon, it takes about 3 or 4 days one way. And in Apollo, we were on the surface for a few days and then 3 or 4 days back. So you're in space for a week, maybe 2 weeks. For Artemis, we plan to do 3 or 4 days there, maybe a week or 2 or 3, or maybe even a month on the moon, and then back. So maybe a month or 2 total time in space. But for Mars, just to get to Mars, it takes 6 to 8 months one way and 6 to 8 months on the way back. And so you're talking about a year in space just to get there and back. And then you just want to spend some time on the surface too. So it's a much bigger problem to solve. If something goes wrong on the moon, you can get back pretty quickly. Something goes wrong on Mars, you can get back. It's just going to take you a while. So we're using Artemis and going to the moon to learn how we can live off of the Earth for long periods of time. Since we're doing it for the first time for those longer periods, we can go back if something goes wrong, but we really want to understand how things work when we go to Mars, since it's so much farther away. The technology is pretty similar. You want to live out of a rover or some sort of habitat, you'll have similar spacesuits. So it's all very applicable, but it's a lot longer time. And another problem is that when you want to talk to people on the moon, it's just a couple seconds to talk to them back and forth, just like a bad internet connection. Well, for Mars, it's 20 minutes one way. So if you say hi, it'll be 20 minutes until you hear it back. And so that's a whole different way of doing mission planning. We're used to saying, okay, take a picture of that. Okay, yeah, turn it this way or go over here, and they can do it pretty quickly. On Mars, you just can't do that. So it's a very different way of doing missions. This is a great picture here. Been a fan of Mars for a long time and following the rovers there. I think you're probably all aware of Perseverance landing recently, following on from Curiosity, which is the one before that. So we've been sending robots to the moon to Mars for decades now. And the first ones were, this big, but now Perseverance is the size of a car, and it's doing really awesome science there. Of course, the helicopter Ingenuity is amazing that we're flying a helicopter on Mars, which if you had told me that a year or 2 ago, I wouldn't have believed you. But all of that is learning how to live on Mars and how to work on Mars before we send humans, because sending humans is going to be challenging. So there's a similar picture to what you saw for the moon, but similar sort of spacesuits, the lander looks a little bit different. Mars is more challenging to land on because it has an atmosphere. And with the moon, you don't have an atmosphere, there's no air. And so you can just use rockets, thrusters to go all the way down to the surface and land. But from Mars, you're going so fast that if you just try to use rockets, it's pretty challenging. And so we have a big aero shield. You can see the kind of the flat bottom. And it's similar to how Perseverance landed. They slow down, they hit the atmosphere and slow down a lot, and then they can land with thrusters like on the moon. And so you can see the lander, the habitat over there on the side has that technology on it. So the landing is a little bit challenging, but everything else is the same. This very similar spacesuit, similar science and technology that we'd be using on Mars. So that's what we get these images back from Mars, and it's pretty mind-blowing to think that tiny little dot is Earth. But getting a picture from a rover, a robot is one thing, but having someone be there to see that and take a picture will be something else. So humans on Mars is where we're headed. So the end of these presentations are always awesome because I'm an engineer. I went to college for math and science, and that's what people think of when they think of NASA is engineers and scientists. But NASA has tons of different people that work here, that work on the space industry, and you don't have to be an engineer. You don't have to be really good at math and science to work for NASA or, of course, be interested in NASA. So this shows a few of the areas that we have work at NASA that you may not be aware of. Go back one slide. I'm gonna go through each one of these. So the first one is an internship. It's a pretty low bar way of getting to work for NASA. You can be an intern, and then if you want to go somewhere else, you can. But you can intern all over the country. So starting on the top there, people that weld. So you don't have to be a theoretical physicist to learn how to weld at NASA. Welding metal in the space industry is very complicated, and we have some of the best in the world people that weld, and they're very critical. When you weld a bridge together, you don't have to worry about it being too heavy. But when you're welding a spacecraft together, you have to be very, very careful. It has to be very strong, but also very light. And so the welding that we do at NASA is amazing. Of course, avionics, that top right, the airplanes. We fly a lot of airplanes here at NASA, both to train crew, train the astronauts, but also just to advance aerodynamic technology. And so working on the airplane, great. Bottom right there, just construction for the launch pad. The launch pads are big and important and complicated, and we have to build new ones and repair them and update them all the time. The bottom middle one there, the flight controller, you've probably heard of that one. If you see mission control down in Houston, those are the people that talk to the astronauts and run the space station. So that's a pretty nice looking one. Food science is so fascinating. That bottom left one, we have to learn how to make food that can sustain you for long periods of time, but can be packed down into something really small, gives you all your nutrients. You can eat it while you're out on the surface in a suit. There's all kinds of crazy stuff that food scientists have to do. If you have a bad meal here on Earth, you go to the doctor or you're just down for the day. Well, you can't do that in space. You need to have all your meals pre-planned in advance to make sure you feel healthy the whole time you're out there. And so those kind of people are critical for the crew. Social media, of course, I'm talking to you right now, and that's because we have a big outreach group at NASA. We love talking to students and talking to people all over the world about what we do. And you don't have to be an engineer to do that. You just have to be able to talk to people and plan things out and coordinate and be good at engaging people online. That's a big part of NASA, and we do a really good job. Robotics there. So we talked about perseverance. That's a big part of it. I work on the human side, but my background is actually in robotics. And so I worked on robotic landers and rovers and things, which are a little bit different than working with crew. Graphic designers. So if you just like designing things and you're more of an artist, of course, the Artemis logo and everything that you see that's in these presentations that look really pretty, that's their job, and they do a great job at it. Astronaut trainers, so that's the big pool that we have in Houston. When you go to space, it's really hard to train for that, and so they put you in a spacesuit in the pool, and they get you balanced just right so you feel like you're in space, and then you can practice everything you're going to do when you're in space there. So that's a big part of it, and the trainers are the people in the scuba suits that help the astronauts do that. Geologists, I said I work with a lot of scientists. Lunar geologists are a big part of it. They're the ones who told us, here's the interesting stuff that's on the moon and where we should land and what we should do when we get there and what tools should we bring. Geologists and scientists are a big part. And then the spacesuit designer, I work with them very closely. I haven't met her specifically, but I have seen her around before. So I meet these people a lot. She's not some model or something. She's an actual engineer that the person in the spacesuit that works on the suit. So they're all over the place down in Houston. That may be the last one of those. There we go. So yeah, it's a team sport. It's not just engineers. We have people all over the country, all over the world that are helping with this. And so we're going back to the moon. I think there we go. One more video. All right, got time for questions.
Okay, people, if you have any question for Logan, you can ask now, okay? If you have any question, you can do it for us. Anyone has you want to use the chat?
Yeah, I can look in the chat. I can.
Whatever. Okay.
Daniel, I have a question.
question.
Okay, please.
Since there are many companies, is there a specific law, like a specific constitution,
Constitution or something.
constitution for like space things, for example, landing on the moon or doing anything about space?
Yeah, let me see if I understand. You're asking, there's a lot of different companies going and different countries that are going, and how do we decide who can land where and who can dig up stuff? Is that what you're asking?
Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a really interesting question. And one of the best ways to think about it is Antarctica. So Antarctica isn't owned by any one country, and we generally use that for science. And so there's just been agreements between countries about, we'll work together over here. You guys can have your base over there, and we'll have a base here, and we'll help each other. And so, yeah, I forget what the documents are called, the Outer Space Treaty, I think there's of the 70s, but a lot of countries around the world signed a treaty and a constitution, kind of like a constitution that dictates who can do what where. One interesting thing you'll hear that's not about the moon, but there's asteroids out there that have really good precious metals or water. And once we kind of learn how to live and work that far out, you can go grab one of those asteroids and sell it. And that's, that'll be allowed. It'll be really important. If you're out halfway to Mars and you need some water, maybe someone can bring you a rock with water full of it. So it's definitely complicated. I think we're doing a good job, but we're hoping that, in the interest of science and peace, we're not going to try to militarize the moon. We're going to go there to do science and be smart about it. So I think we're in good shape. Good question.
I have a question. Can I ask it?
Yeah.
First, I would like to comment that it's really amazing if you compare the Apollo mission with the new one just to see the technological advance they made in 50 years. It's just amazing. But my question is, if you look at Apollo on a cultural standpoint, there was a lot of cultural changes with Apollo. Like sci-fi had a peak of popularity and a lot of medium changed for music, arts, and movies. Do you think it will happen the same? It will happen again? The culture change that happened at Apollo?
I don't think I caught all of that. Antonio, did you hear? I think it was breaking up a little.
It's a kind of, when the man went to the moon, the time of Apollo, we were living a kind of revolution in arts and culture, and Apollo was a kind of inspiration for that. So he's asking if now, can we get the things involved again, the arts and music with the new expedition to the moon?
Yeah, that's an interesting question that I've never been asked before, but I liked it a lot. Yeah, the 1960s, 1970s, there was a big revolution about art. And yeah, did Apollo, what part did Apollo play in that? I think it definitely inspired the whole world. And I've seen lots of art and sci-fi and movies that are based on that. I think that this could do that and more, because the way with the internet and social media, it's so easy to see. I mean, how many people watched the Perseverance landing? It was millions, if not billions of people watching those landings, and they were 3 a.m. So we're so connected and we're so quick at sharing information. And there's so many ways to see people's art and creativity so quickly. Back in the 60s, you had to get published in a book or a newspaper or something. Now, if you make something really cool about Artemis and post it online, it can be seen by everyone in the world really easily. So I definitely hope that it's involved. The pictures alone are going to be so great. We see what it would look like. Those pictures I showed today of this is what an astronaut on the moon could look like, but seeing that actually happen and seeing it in really good quality. Apollo, they didn't, the camera technology just wasn't very good. And so the images were black and white and grainy, and you couldn't really tell what was going on. But today we're going to be high definition, color, everything. And so that should be an inspiration for a lot of people. I hope a lot of people watch. I hope a lot of people want to go. There's also a lot of interest in not just having NASA astronauts go to the moon or go into space. There's a lot of companies that are sending not just people. They do a little bit of training, but in the next 5 or 10 years, I think that just about anybody will be able to go to space. You could win some sort of lottery system or something and go to space pretty easily, and that'll do even more. So it's Artemis that NASA is kind of leading, but really the whole world and the whole country are making it easier and easier to go to space and to inspire people. And so yes, that's a really good point that I haven't thought about. Is there's going to be a whole new wave of sci-fi and books and art and music that's going to be based on these next few years, and I'm excited to be a part of it.
Is it correct if I say that you are responsible for the rover that is going to land on the moon?
So I'm working on the lander. So the big lander that they land in, and then once we get on the moon, what we do once we're on the moon is what I work on. So when we go out in the spacesuit and do an EVA and go do the science and everything, that's what I work on.
Perfect.
Hello, Logan. I have a question. You've talked about the time response from the communication between the moon and Earth and vice versa. But how do you keep a precise communication with the rovers with this time response? Because I was really curious to know when you talked about, I was trying to imagine what it was like to control something that would take this time to respond.
Yeah, communications is a big challenge. So like I said, Mars is going to be a whole different challenge. So I'll talk about that in a second. But on the moon, it'll be a few seconds later, and you could, if you were driving a rover, for example, from Earth, you could you have pictures and you drive it forward a little bit and then wait for it to show up, drive forward, wait for it to show up, drive forward. It wouldn't be too bad. You still wouldn't want to just go off and do something crazy without checking first. So that's not too bad. When talking to the humans, it's also, you can hear from Apollo, them talking to mission control. They'll say, okay, I'm going to go around this boulder and take a picture, and it takes a second, and then they say, yes, go ahead and do that and take a picture. So communication isn't too bad on the moon. One challenging part, though, is that since here's the moon, we're on the bottom here, and Earth is over here. The Earth is on the horizon. So if you think about it, when the moon comes up, when the sun comes up in the morning, and it's right on the horizon, that's where Earth is going to be the whole time. The Earth is never going to be overhead. And that actually makes it even more challenging for communication, because you're trying to talk to them, but all the radiation, the radio waves, they're bouncing off of the moon, and it makes it more technically challenging from an engineer to talk like that. So the South Pole is really good because the Earth will always be there, but you have to make sure it's not bouncing off all kinds of things and causing problems. So you have to build your communication system to take care of that. On Mars, though, it's a whole different problem. It's going to be, when we drive rovers on Mars today, they plan out the entire day ahead of them and then send it to the spacecraft, send it to Perseverance, Curiosity, and the rover just drives itself. And so it has to have lots of technology to look at the ground ahead of it and make sure it's not driving into a rock or off a cliff or something. So it has to be really smart, the robot does, because humans can't control it in real time. And so if you say, okay, go do all this for this entire day, normal day happens, it does everything, it sends pictures back, and everything goes well. But if something does happen, if it does see a hazard or something that could be wrong, it just has to stop and wait, and it'll send a signal to Earth, and we'll be able to figure it out. But it just has to be a lot more careful and a lot more smart than the stuff on the moon. And so with humans, when humans do go to Mars, it'll be very similar. With the people in Houston and Mission Control, we'll plan out a day or maybe a week and say, go outside, go look at this rock, go do this science. And then the humans on Mars will go do it. And if everything goes well, it'll be fine and we'll get everything we need. But if something goes wrong, the crew on Mars will just have to stop and just kind of go back to their safety of their habitat or something and just wait. So it's going to be very, very different, very challenging. Is that what you were asking?
Yes, that was it. Thank you for your response.
Questions? We're
I
waiting.
have a question.
Okay, Luisa.
So I think that those like big missions, they have a lot of technology involved, and is something they develop new technology, and a lot of things that we use in our day-to-day life is because of the development of the technology in those space missions, like digital cameras and those things. What do you think that is like a new technology that maybe could be like more popular in a way, like industries like how can I say, like copy in some way to like I don't know if you get it, the question, but is yeah.
I do. And Patricia's already ready with the chart here. So we call those spin-off technologies. So it's NASA goes and works to solve a problem. And then pretty quickly someone thinks, well, that could solve a problem here on Earth too. And everyone benefits. So you see some examples here of places that's happened in the past. So I'm trying to think of, for the mission that I work on, for Artemis, for HLS, what could be some technologies that we're trying to solve that could be applicable? One of the first ones off the top of my head is we are trying to keep rocket fuel very cold, very cold. And when you're out in space, you think of space as being cold, but really there's just nothing there. It's not really cold. And so you have something that's cold and then the sun hits it and heats it up, and there's nowhere for that heat to go. And so keeping things cold that need to be, rocket fuel is at negative 300 Celsius, the really, really cold temperatures. And so the technology that we're going to develop to be better at keeping things cold, we like to keep things cold on Earth too, coolers, Yetis. So that's one area, just keeping things cool, that's going to be very challenging. One thing that I haven't talked about yet that is a challenge on the moon is dust, and on Mars. So the moon, if you've seen pictures of Apollo, of the astronauts after they get back inside, they're covered in dust. And it's because they fall down, they go lean down to dig something up. And the dust on the moon is very different than dust on Earth. You can get dirty on Earth, but the dust on the moon just sticks to you. And it's really sharp. Because there hasn't been wind and water to soften it down. We don't have those, it doesn't exist on the moon. And so dust, if it comes back inside the lander or the rover or the habitat, it can cause problems. And so we're going to have to come up with technologies to keep the dust out, to vacuum it up, to keep things controlled. And so anywhere where you're trying to keep your air clean or your house clean could benefit from those kind of technologies. The camera and the communications technologies that we talked about, I think I saw recently that Nokia is planning on sending or testing some cell phone technology on the moon. And so just to being able to communicate to each other is a big challenge. I talked about talking back to Earth, but it's a big challenge if here's the lander and here's your crew. Talking between the lander and the crew is challenging as you get farther and farther away. The radio and the technology and the power you have can only go so far. And we want to go far away from the lander if we can, if there's interesting science to do. So if we're going to develop new communication technology, cell phone technology, be able to talk to each other on the moon. So yeah, those are just off the top of my head. We're solving a lot of problems to go to the moon, and yeah, I can see lots and lots of spin-offs on top of what we already have, which is a lot. So good question.
Who has the next question?
I have a question.
Okay.
In the 60s, the United States was in a Cold War. And so NASA had to go fast to create new ships, to land the man to the moon. So now that we are not in a war, how long it takes to send a man to send a people in a safe ship to the moon?
Yeah, so that's a good point. In the 60s, one of the reasons we went so fast to the moon in Apollo was we were in a Cold War with Russia and we were in the space race. That's exactly right. Russia did several things before us. They had the first satellite, the first human in space, and we started off catching up. We were behind, and then we ended up far exceeding them for a lot of different reasons. So we don't really have that these days. There are other countries that are exploring space. China just landed a rover on Mars for the first time. Was it last week? So it's not exactly the same thing. And so instead of being in a kind of a competition, we want to go together. You saw the international partners we have for the Gateway. And so we hope that instead of rushing to get there, which can be good, but it can be dangerous, we hope that if we all go together at the same time, we can check each other's work and make sure that we're doing the right thing and help each other out. Okay, Canada has their arm on the space station, right? The Canadarm. Canada is really good at that kind of technology, and they've worked on it for years. So we want to, instead of doing it ourselves because they've already done it, we want to use the technology that they're good at. So we hope that we can go together this time, and maybe we won't go super fast, but that's okay because we'll still get there, and we'll get there safer, and we'll stay there for longer. When we went in the space race, once we landed on the moon and we won, the country kind of lost a little bit of interest because, okay, we won, we beat Russia, we're done, I don't care anymore. But this time we're making such an effort to talk about, we're not going just one time, we're not going just to plant a flag, we're going to stay. And that means a very different thing for the public, and it should keep interest going the whole time. We'll say, okay, this time we're going to land and do this, but the next time we're going to build this, or we're going to land this, and it's going to keep going and going and going. So I hope it means that we stay for longer. Good question.
Thank you. Any question? Waiting for more questions.
I have another question that kind of connects with the thing that you just said. Like, I have the impression that because of social media and maybe because our generation is like, how can I say, like, we don't feel like, oh my God, this is so new, those things. People can be like, oh, we already have gone to the moon, is whatever. And especially like when you're not racing to do something better than other people, do you think that maybe because of those conditions, people will be, how can I say, like, less excited about the whole Artemis thing?
Yeah, that's a good point. Our generation isn't trying to necessarily be the best about everything or beat someone else or be better. Yeah. So does that mean that they won't care as much about Artemis? We've already been, so why are we going back? I definitely hope not. I hope that our generation, maybe we are like that, but we're also really interested in science and exploration, and not necessarily to beat other people, but just to get smarter about the world and about the solar system and how it can and make our lives better on Earth, and make better movies and better everything, better art. So yeah, I think that we do have to deal with not being in a space race. It's a different world. NASA got a much bigger part of the budget, of the government budget back in Apollo, because we were in a space race and we were competing with someone else. And so right now we're not planning on getting a huge chunk of the budget. We shouldn't plan on that, and we should plan on a consistent level of money. And we do so much with the budget that we do get. I work on the Artemis program, but NASA does so many other things, the space station and so many satellites and telescopes and everything, all the Mars information, Mars probes. So we have to plan to have kind of a lower level of interest than the excitement that was around the space race and beating someone else in that generation. But I think we can do just as good, if not better, because we're so well connected. We love science and just cool pictures and images so well. I think we'll do even better. But it is a very different environment than the 60s.
Logan, I have one question about the first woman to land on the moon. I think this is something really special. And there are lots of girls here that would like to listen about this important moment.
Yes. So when they announced the name Artemis, I cried a little bit. I have 2 daughters, and Apollo, that's how the world was back then. It was all male military pilots, and it made sense for the time, I guess. But yes, from the oh, got an echo. Patricia, is that or someone's Antonio? Maybe you want to mute. It's a little echoey. There we go. Yeah, Patricia. So Patricia showed the astronaut corps, and it's half women. I think it's 18 people, and 9 of them are women. So we're very serious about. It's a little echoey. That's I think that they get it. Very serious, very excited about the first woman landing on the moon. Women are half of the world, and so they should be half of the astronaut program, and they are. All the astronaut selections recently have been about half women. Women are just as good at this stuff as anyone else, of course, and it's really exciting to see. The other interesting development or interesting part of it is that it's the first woman and then the first person of color is going to go to the moon. So it's not just about women, but it's about just being inclusive about everybody. And seeing that it's important to me personally, and it's important to NASA, and you can see it reflected in the astronaut corps that you see here. The astronaut corps is much bigger than this, but these are the people that have been selected initially, and you can see how awesome and diverse and great they are. So yeah, I'm a huge fan. My daughters, they watch a lot of they're young, they're only 6 and 4. But I still, they love to watch when Perseverance landed and all the other exciting rockets that happened. So it's great. It's really important to me.
Do you have any question? Because we have only 5 minutes left for us to finish this incredible moment in our history, that having somebody from a new Artemis mission to talk to us here in Brazil. It's unbelievable how I am feeling exactly at this moment. Anybody with us? There's a question here in the chat.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yeah, can you ask it?
I would like to ask, what is there a main or some main concerns about the system to land? Like, what would be the most important thing or things to think about for the system that's gonna land the people?
Yes, that's a great question. So you're asking, what problems are we trying to solve? What will be difficult? What are we thinking about? There's a lot of them. Landing on the moon is hard. One of the biggest ones that I can think of is it's the same thing for Mars. Usually the most interesting places are the most hazardous. They have the most boulders, they have the steepest slopes, the most rocks. And so we want to land really close to where good science is and good geology and good rocks are, but land there safely. And some of these vehicles are very big. And so as you try to land something that's very big, landing it safely is a big challenge. And then another big problem for the lander is, and it was more a problem for Mars, is what happens if something goes wrong? How do you plan something? You're a few days away from Earth. How do you build something that is so safe that if something isn't going to go wrong? But of course, if you build it so safe that nothing will ever go wrong, it'll be too heavy. So it's a very fine balance between being able to go and making it completely safe that no one will ever get hurt. And it's a tough part. That's being an engineer. Being an engineer is finding that right balance. So landing is a problem. Communications is a problem. Sunlight. Yeah, there's a lot, but we're getting there.
Logan, there is
Thank you
one.
very much.
It's going to be the final question here. Elena has a problem with microphone. She sent me the question, and I think this question is really interesting. That has a connection with you, people from NASA. In the year 2020, due to the pandemics, we have seen the consequence of isolation and staying away from everyone for our mental health. And how is the psychological support they are giving to you? Like how you guys are preparing, have been preparing mentally for this whole experience? What is the biggest emotional challenge?
Yeah, it's been hard, right? It's been hard for the whole world. And there are a lot of people that work from home. I'm in my house right now, and they loved it and they didn't mind it. But I really like talking to people and seeing people in person. And that's been challenging mentally for my mental health. NASA has done a really good job of making lots of tools available to us, Zoom and other meeting tools where we can see each other very easily. But it just wasn't safe to go back in person until now or soon. So the best way that I've dealt with it is there's been a few people that I meet with in person. We go get a drink somewhere and sit outside apart from each other. And just getting a few minutes with people once a month or so helps me a lot. There's been a couple tests that I did participate in where I did fly out to different parts of the country and we all wore masks and followed all the safety guidelines, but we still accomplished several good tests safely. And so we don't do it every month and we do it smartly. But we're still being allowed, as long as we're safe about it, to perform our tests and see people. And we're near the end. We're starting to relax those cautions. And so I don't think it'll be long until we're back in person again. But it has been challenging with us, just like the rest of the world. So I'm glad that it's almost over.
Okay, so people, our time is over. I would like to say thank you so much for Logan Kennedy and Patricia Moore for having with us here. This historical moments of having those incredible people from NASA. Javier, thank you for the support always. I'd like to say thank you for the students of ETCH, Santa Rita, and Objetivo Pouso Alegre. They are with us today. And my students from Conhecência, and the students and the teachers from 19 de Março, I see Gustavo here, our principal Lu. Thank you so much. This is an amazing moment. Logan, if you want to say the final words, it's to you. Thank you so much.
I just said it in chat that those are really great questions. Sometimes I'll talk to students and we have time for questions and nobody says anything. And that didn't happen today. They were really good, insightful questions. I know the language barrier, English is a problem. I don't speak Portuguese, sorry. I did go to Rio though recently, a couple years ago, so I learned obrigada. So I said, what is that? Thank you.
Obrigado.
There you go. So even with the language barrier, you all did really, really great. I'm really inspired by what you guys are doing. You're going out and talking to people, students, children that are in bad shape, and you're trying to inspire them. And so I hope I did the same here. I can inspire you, you inspire them. We all make the world a better place.
Thank you so much. People, thank you so much. See you all. Thank you, Logan. Thank you, Patricia, Javier, and everybody. Thank you for this amazing moment. Thank you so much.